Jen, your board's really filling up.
I know, right?
All right. Mrs. Dixon, we are live. You can open the meeting, go to executive, and then I will pop out of the Zoom and I will also be departing.
Thank you. This meeting is now called to order at 5:04 p.m. I will do the roll call for the council. Mr. LeBlanc,
Yes.
Mrs. Shockley,
Yes.
Mrs. Ludwig, Miss Ludwig,
Yes.
thank you, and Mrs. Dixon, yes. The council will, welcome to the members of the public. The council will go into executive session and be back into public session approximately 6 p.m. Council members, may I have a motion and second that the council recess into executive session to consider matters pertaining to Rhode Island General Law 42465A1 for a discussion of job performance, character, or physical or mental health of a person or persons, specifically town manager candidates, with the town's hiring consultant, Mr. Lynch. All persons affected shall have been notified in advance in writing and advised that they may require that the discussion be held in an open meeting. Do I have a motion?
I'll make the motion. And I'll second it.
Thank you, Ms. Ludwig and Ms. Shockley. Roll call, I'll call the roll. Mr. LeBlanc,
Yes.
Mrs. Shockley,
Yes.
Ms. Ludwig,
Yes.
Mrs. Dixon, yes. Okay, thank you.
Give me 2 seconds while I kill the feed and then you can stop.
Mr. Lynch, welcome.
Ian, it's good to see you again.
It's good to see you. We have some wonderful new people, and I'll have you introduce themselves to you in just a moment, and vice versa. Thank
Great,
you.
thank you.
Hi, Joanne.
Okay, we are back on YouTube. If you're set, I will start the recording and I will put us live on Zoom. Chairperson Dixon, is that sufficient?
Yes. Good evening, everyone. I'm reconvening.
Not yet, give me 2 seconds.
Oh, okay.
You now have it, ma'am.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm reconvening the public meeting for a workshop at 6:15. Madam Clerk, roll call of the council, please.
Ann Dixon,
Here.
Jennifer Ludwig,
Yes.
Long,
Yes.
Kimberly Shockley,
Yes.
I report that the town council met per Rhode Island General Law 42465A1 for a discussion of job performance, character, or physical or mental health of a person or persons, specifically town manager candidates, with the town's hiring consultant, Mr. Lynch. All persons affected shall have been notified in advance in writing and advised that they may require that the discussion be held at an open meeting. No votes were taken during the executive session, and the council did not discuss candidates who did not meet the requirements for town manager position. Do I have a motion to seal the minutes of the executive session?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Ms. Ludwig. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Shockley. Roll call, please.
Ann Dixon,
Here.
Jennifer Ludwig,
Yes.
Jamie LeBlanc,
Yes.
Kimberly Shockley.
Yes.
Thank you. We are now in Agenda A1. Agenda A1 was posted as a joint workshop for the Town Council, School Committee, and Coventry Building Committee. The School Committee did not post this meeting, therefore I will ask only that the Coventry Building Committee open its meeting. Mr. Murray, the members of the Coventry Town Council welcome you, the members of the Coventry Building Committee, and members of Studio One. Please open your meeting and do a roll call, please.
Thank you, Council President. I call this meeting to order for the School Building Committee at 6:17 p.m. Donna, could you call the roll, please?
Yes. Luke Murray,
Here?
Rita Hall,
Here.
Amy Anzalone,
Here.
John Cowett,
Here.
Dixon. Ann Dixon,
Here.
okay. Dave D'Agostino. No, I see his name. Okay, Christine Kennedy. No, Christine. Robert Levesque,
Here.
Craig Levis.
Here.
Joe Lucian. Sarah Mangiarelli.
Sarah indicated she'd be absent.
Okay. Jason Martin. Kathy Patnode.
Present.
John Coates. I see you, John.
Here.
Lee Restall. And Kimberly Shockley. That's it.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you all to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for whom it stands, one nation, under God, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated. Mr. Murray, thank you so much for convening your Coventry Building Committee and Studio J people. We're happy to have you with us. One question, do you want questions from the council or or the Coventry Building Committee as the presentation is being made, or would you like us to wait until the end of the presentation?
I will actually defer to Phil on that because he's going to give the bulk of the presentation. Phil, what's your thoughts?
So I am happy to entertain questions during the presentation. I have about 30 slides. We can go through them rather quickly. I'm certainly happy to go back in the presentation slide deck as well as necessary. Will there be a way that I could see if someone has a question, or will you just raise your hand on the screen?
I think because of the amount of members that we have here, I would ask, and Council President Dixon, if you're okay with it, people could use the raise your hand function on Zoom. So that way we're not having to search the screen. And then as they come in, I'll try to monitor. And Ed, if you could also kind of keep an eye out, that'd be helpful. But yeah, I think answering the questions as we go is a good strategy. There's a lot of information tonight, and I think hitting it while the slide is up and pertinent would be a good strategy. So yes.
So since you're leading the presentation, Mr. Murray, why don't you recognize people as they have questions, okay?
Excellent, will do.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Murray?
Yeah, so I want to first thank the town council for entertaining us tonight. We wanted to have this joint work session. We felt it was very important, as we always have through this process, to keep the town council in the loop on what we're doing. We have about a month left. I just wanted to, as part of this introduction, just give a really quick snapshot on why we're here. This is part of a multi-stage process, which is required by the Rhode Island Department of Education as part of a logical format to approach school construction, school improvement projects. So there's 5 steps in this process. We are at step 2. Stage 1 was identification of the need. We've finished that process. We've submitted a report. That report was approved by RIDE. We are now in step 2, which is how do we address that need? We are drafting this report, which is due on February 15th. This makes us eligible, and I say just makes us eligible for potential reimbursement from RIDE for any projects that we identify in the stage 2 report. So there's no commitments in the stage 2. Essentially, we are proposing projects to RIDE, asking for their feedback for approval on what they would potentially give us for reimbursement for those projects. So when we go to a vote, which will require of school committee and town council, that will be the contents, to essentially submit that report to get the response from RIDE. If RIDE comes back and says we are eligible for certain reimbursements, let's say in April or May of this year is our expectation, then at that point we would need to decide whether we wanted to move on to stage 3, and that would require a larger vote to potentially go to bond for these projects. Phil will go into more detail as he gets through his presentation, but I just want to be very clear that this stage 2 is not obligating the town on any financial, there's no financial obligation from the town as part of the next vote you'll be seeing in early February when the town council convenes. So, and I think that's important to note to the public. I will also say that tonight you're going to hear something we haven't discussed, even as a school building committee. We've discussed it in a very high level, but the financial aspect of the project. I literally just got an email from Steve Massaroni from PFM regarding some of the financials, which still needs to be wrung out. But we wanted to present some numbers tonight and give some context, which Phil will do, and I urge you to ask any questions that you have at this point. Just keeping in mind that we still have a lot of financial planning to do even after tonight, and we'll continue that. So I do want to introduce Phil Conte. He is from Studio JAED. I believe Rick's on here too, correct? Oh yeah, I think Rick. And Phil from Studio JAED, who have been excellent through this process. I don't know if, I know a couple of members of the council have had the opportunity to hear them speak, but they've guided us through the stage 1. They're guiding us through the stage 2 process, an excellent design team, and we're confident they can bring this to fruition. So without further ado, Phil, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Luke. Will I be able to share my screen? I think so.
All set, Phil. You can go with it.
All right, great. So let's see. Let's start here. And do you see the introductory slide?
Yes.
Excellent, very good. So this is a very exciting time. And I look forward to presenting this information to you. And certainly, Luke, as necessary, interrupt me and we can answer any questions. As Luke mentioned, we are on track to submit the Stage 2 application by February 15th. And as Luke mentioned, that will require a school building committee recommendation, a school committee approval, and a town council approval to submit this document as we approach the end of January, beginning of February. The document that we put together is a voluminous document. They ask for 3 copies. It includes many narratives, all of the presentations, all of the documents from our consultants. We are on track to submit that, and I thought the best way to present that would be to go through the table of contents that goes along with the Stage 2 application. But for members of the public and for those who have not had the opportunity to participate in as many of the workshops, I want you to know that for quite some time, from the very beginning that we started working together as a team, this message of being responsible and innovative has really been at the core of every decision we have made. We understand that it's a constant balance of project scope and size. What are the programmatic needs for Coventry Public Schools? What are the town funding limits, debt ceilings, debt cliffs? What other needs does the town have as we approach this? Luke mentioned we will be talking dollars at the end of this presentation, but it's important that you all keep in mind that this was done through a responsible balance of all the information that we had at that time. So the document that we will be submitting covers 7 categories. The first is a project summary and prioritization. Then the feasibility study, schematic design documents, the construction cost estimates, a financing plan, local support, and project timeline. And we're going to talk about each one of these that we're working on and provide some evidence and documentation that supports that. So the project summary and prioritization is one of the most important pieces of this document. It clearly summarizes what we are doing. As Luke mentioned, Stage 1 identifies the need. That was accepted. Now they are expecting to see from you, well, what is your solution to this need? And we need to clearly summarize that. We need to prioritize the projects because in some cases it's just not one project. And in Coventry, it's not just one project. So we need to prioritize that and explain in what way we're doing that. And then, of course, they want us to make sure that we have looked at any enrollment projections to make sure that we are not overbuilding or underbuilding as we move forward with these major investments. So, you know, they could say, Phil, what data did you use to put together this summary, this project prioritization? Well, if you recall, in Stage 1, we conducted a facilities condition assessment. That we went and toured the schools, presented that information, listened to the teachers and staff and community on what the needs were of that particular school. And we started aggregating all of this data. And of course, we looked at enrollment projections to see if we are leveling off, declining, inclining, or at a plateau. And we conducted a series of meetings. This is not exhaustive by any means, but from June until this December, we had a series of workshops with the school building committee, building tours, a community workshop, and endeavored to work with the educator and the administration on the projects so that we know that they are addressing the curriculum need, not just the facility needs. And Jason in particular has been very helpful in providing the facility data, and the principal of the middle school has been very helpful in working with our educational planners. So through that entire process, the school building committee has developed a list of projects that they wish to accomplish over 5 years. And that includes these 5 types of projects. The first is asset protection, right? Your buildings are assets. They need to be protected. There are projects that we call warm, safe, and dry. They may be deficiencies that need to be corrected. Health and safety is a category of work that does provide for additional incentives with RIDE, which we wanted to capture. RIDE has sort of developed this grouping of projects called HIVE, H-I-V-E, which means high impact visual enhancements. So they recognize that schools that are merely painted, have some refreshment to them, has a significant impact on the morale of the students and what the parents think is happening inside that building and the teachers. So we wanted to make sure we included some HIVE projects within the district. And then most important is the educational enhancements. And we are proposing some minor and major educational enhancements. So the proposed projects and descriptions throughout the schools within Coventry look like this. At Hopkins Hill, Tioga, Black Rock, and Washington Oak, we're looking to perform some asset protection and HIVE. At Western Coventry, your oldest school, we want to engage in projects that address asset protection, HIVE, and some minor improvements. Coventry High School, your flagship school, we're looking for asset protection, HIVE, and minor improvements. And then the middle school. The middle school we have identified as needing some major additions and renovations along with some asset protection and HIVE. The reason why, let me go back to this. The reason why we have decided on the middle school, after looking at everything in its totality, is that every student in Coventry goes to the middle school. The middle school years are the most difficult and dynamic for young children. It's where they have the potential to become disengaged from their educational path and career. The elementary schools do a great job because of the teachers and the staff. And the high school is your flagship school. The middle school, we believe, is in need of some significant work, and we're going to talk about that. So let's look at the proposed scope of work for the schools that we just talked about. We talked about a grouping of projects that are going to have asset protection and HIVE. These are the schools identified in the left column, the size, when they were constructed. And this is some of the scope of work that we're looking at. We're looking at that exist in terms of ADA accessibility and some egress issues. So we want to make these buildings warm, safe, dry. We want to protect the asset, and we want to have an aesthetic change. We want to let people know that we did some work at these buildings. Needs some NEASC deficiencies that need to be addressed, as well as some of the asset protection items and the high impact visual enhancements. Now, the middle school, preliminarily, without diving too much into the design, at a high level, I'd like you to see what we are proposing. This building, we are proposing those sections of the buildings to be demolished. And significant deficiency in terms of its vehicular circulation patterns and how it sits on the site and how one navigates the property. That was all section 1 of the stage 2. The next section is the architectural feasibility study. That's where we develop detailed educational specifications. We do structural analysis. We do geotech analysis of the soils. We look at the transportation impact at the buildings, and we conduct some energy analysis. What should a typical space look like in Coventry Public Schools? This happens to be a classroom, and that happens to be just the principal's office. But we get into detail because we are wrestling with what we have at the middle school. So, for example, the sense of arrival at the middle school, the image on the left, but on the right is probably what you want. So what we try to do, up the project at the middle school that is more 21st century than what you currently have. We conduct a series of block studies so that we can convey to, we take the structural reports that are done very seriously, making sure that within the project scopes of work, we address them. The feasibility study requires a significant study of this happens to be just a site plan from our civil engineer who's working with us on this project. And you see at the 2 areas of the addition to the middle school, at a high level, you can see that we are completely reimagining is the schematic design documents. These are documents that we need to develop for all of the projects, not just the middle school, but all of the projects can provide the costs of this project that we submit as part of our stage 2 for, as Luke mentioned, consideration for reimbursement by the state. This just happens to be one of the floor plan significance of this project. We will be required to reach a certain number of points. And it is not uncommon to introduce some type of solar or renewable energy measure into the project. I would probably say that would happen at the next step, which is stage 3, and that follows a successful approval and a successful bond vote as you start to move into design. So in stage 2, we recognize it, we do address it, and it develops in more detail in stage 3. But certainly there is a high degree of interest in sustainable design features throughout the entire RIDE process.
Thank you.
And Phil, hey, if I may, just to expand on that, just keep in mind, I know a lot of these designs seem pretty well baked up. We see floor plans, we see some intricate details of interior spaces, but it's important to know all of this is very preliminary. It gets us in a ballpark where we can start estimating the project and getting our head wrapped around a pretty good sense of where we're going to fall. Should we get to a stage 3, that's really where we hit the ground with the finer features of the architectural design. So I know that I had my own comments on the site plan. I think there's things that can be done. But at this point in the game, I know it's not going to move the needle too much from a cost standpoint. So whether we shift the roadway or move parking or do some nuance there, we know we can do that in stage 3. So to Phil's point, some of the things like the energy efficiency on solar, or looking at whether we do rooftop solar, on-site solar, or no solar, that can certainly be baked out in the stage 3 development. And we do have, as many of you know, we have a net metering agreement coming up for energy savings as well. So we are taking advantage of that. So that's part of the context that we'll consider as we go through this. Thanks, Phil.
Excellent. All right, so we talked about the Energy Star, the site planning, schematic design documentation. So, as Luke mentioned, getting us in the ballpark is the most important thing. All right? RIDE has approved your need. They want to see how you're going to address that need. And then they want absolute confidence in what you're asking for in terms of reimbursement and the size of the project. So that means they take our schematic design documents and we send that to our cost estimator, which is happening as we speak, and they're developing their cost estimate. Now that cost estimate has to be all inclusive. For example, it needs to include the trade cost, which is the cost of construction. But they also want to know what will be the future architecture and engineering fees. What will be the construction manager, the owner project manager, the commissioning fees. They want to make sure that your budget has owner's contingency and escalation. They want to make sure that when you do a significant project like the middle school, that you have budgeted for furniture, fixtures, and equipment. It's an absolute embarrassment to build something and then not be able to put furniture in it. And then, of course, technology. They need to make sure that you have covered technology. So the cost estimate component is probably the second most important thing, right? The first is they want to understand what you're doing. Then they want you to go through all of the documentation, but then they want to know what it's going to cost and have you captured everything. Once you have that project cost, they then want to know what is your financing plan? What is going to be your strategy to pay for this? And as you're looking at that strategy, they want you to address, will there be maintenance cost savings? Whoa. Well, yes, there will be, because you're taking for example, at the middle school, you're taking a significant portion of the building that may have deferred maintenance, demolishing it, and building new. So the cost of maintenance will be reduced. They'll want to know, will your instructional or support staff cost increase? Maybe, maybe not, because we're still building a 1,200 student middle school, and that's what you have now. We're not putting any major additions on the elementary schools or high schools. Then they'll say, what about utility costs? Absolutely, there will be utility costs. That's one of the main reasons why we selected the projects that we did at the elementary schools. And certainly, major renovations to the middle school and the new addition will come with all of the benefits of current energy saving technologies. They'll ask us to address transportation cost savings. Will there be savings or will there not be savings? And in this case, there probably won't be, because we're building on the same location for the same number of students. And then they will want to know that you have looked to maximize your incentives and the reimbursement formula. Because right now, there are a series of incentives that you voted for a couple years ago statewide for school construction. Your current base rate of reimbursement is 42.8%. That is what the state will reimburse you for currently. However, because of this incentive program, based on our analysis of the projects that you're doing, you would likely qualify for an additional 10% reimbursement. And that 10% falls into two categories. It falls into the first one, which is projects that address health and safety deficiencies. And as you can see here, I identify, where you do that. Now, you could say, well, Phil, it doesn't look like we're doing health and safety deficiencies at the high school. And I'll say, yes, we are. However, it is not greater than 25% of what we're doing there. Go to the third column, That incentive is for educational enhancements. And you will see that we are not doing any educational enhancements at the elementary schools, but we certainly are at the middle school. And because of some of the NEASC work at the high school, we are doing it at the high school. Now, depending on how these projects are packaged, you can maximize your reimbursement by 10%, so that you're looking at a 52.8% potential reimbursement on the projects. These incentives are critical, and we're going to talk about them particularly when we address the project timeline. So we have worked with the school building committee to identify the most advantageous project timeline to do all seven of, yes.
Sorry to interrupt you, but we have a question from Councilwoman Ludwig.
Hi, I found the raise hand button. Thank you. So I just want to check here. So on the reimbursement area, how do we know that this is kind of what is available? I know we're not missing out on anything else. Is this, I know I've been to a few of the school building committee meetings and heard you talk about a few of these. Is there some sort of process where you, at the end of this, you submit this to RIDE and they come back and say, oh, you missed this area? Or how do we know that there's nothing else out there that we might qualify for? Is there a second set of eyes, or is that what some of the, the background on people in the school building committee have that are looking at this? How do we know?
That's excellent question. And I apologize. I failed to mention that on January 11th, we have a presentation to the RIDE School Building Authority, sort of as a preview of our submission. And we have already sent information to them. And one of the things they're going to want to look at is, are we maximizing the incentives? So we have gone through this process a couple times, so we're very comfortable with it. As early as next week, we will have some initial feedback. Certainly, they review it during stage 2 as well. And when their final approval comes in May, it also references the incentives. So if we are missing any incentives, they certainly will point it out, and we will certainly pursue those incentive points. The incentives are not guaranteed, but RIDE and the School Building Authority try to get as close as possible to guaranteeing it without guaranteeing it. For example, they do not approve of a reimbursement incentive until after the project is complete, which in this case could be a number of years from now. Even though you qualify and you lock in, they are not officially approved until the end of construction, so that we can say, yes, we did all of this work, yes, we did all of that work, and we qualify. Because some communities have experienced some stress over that, because a bond vote may hinge on that extra 10% reimbursement. RIDE, as of most recently, this last round, issued a letter that, in its strongest terms possible, re-emphasize that they approve of your approach, and they approve of the incentives that you're looking for, and provided you do what you say you're going to do, you will receive the incentive. So that is a discussion that we can certainly have in greater detail as we need to. I am going to make a comparison at the end of this presentation that may help clarify this a little bit more. But back to your original question, yes, if we're missing an incentive, we will be made aware of it and we will pursue it.
We have another question from Councilwoman Shockley.
Thank you. I'm not sure if this is exactly the place to ask, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. So, say the town put out a $100 million bond. The actual part we would pay once the project was completed is less than 50% of that?
Correct. And I'm going to walk you through a scenario at the end, which will clarify that a little bit more.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Phil, can I expound on that a little? Because I don't
Sure.
want to cause any confusion. I want to be clear that anything that we would bond would have to be, the initial bond approval would have to be for the full project amount. So the numbers we're discussing, that if we were to go to bond, we can't just say, okay, we can take that 42% off the top. We have to bond for the full amount, but through proper financial planning, and I've talked before about debt cliffs and bond anticipation notes and layering some of that debt, there are ways to soften that over time, so that way we're not actually having to necessarily take the full bond amount, but we do need that full approval. Also, I just want to caveat, as Phil said, you know, being very careful in our words, because I don't want people to get locked in on over 50%. Where the housing aid that's set by RIDE is 42.8. The 10%, we're relatively sure, based on past track record and the way this project is going, we can get that extra 10%. What I can guarantee is if we don't, and Phil will go over the schedule, if we don't move forward and we don't lock in things by certain dates, those incentives definitely expire. So, and Phil will go over that. And Phil, I'll just leave that ball in real quick.
Sure. Thank you.
Luke, the other thing I'd like to add on that, what would effectively be, it wouldn't be 50% of what we're borrowing. It would actually cover most of the interest payments on it. If you look at the amounts when they start coming back, the overall cost on a bond, they'll match, if at the 42%, they'll match and cover most of interest. That the 100 million in that case would still be paid by the town. All the interest would be pretty much taken up by RIDE on the adjustment, if you look at what we've received.
Yeah, because you have to float those bonds through WIDEback.
Correct.
So it gets a little more complex, and we don't have everything back. But we'll
It's not as simple as just saying we get that X back.
right. That's where we're going to disclose some numbers tonight, but I put the big tag on it that we still have a lot of planning to do and wring this out. What the actual impact will be, which is the big number to the taxpayer. Like what is the impact to the actual taxpayer? And Phil's going to give a comparison tonight to at least give you some sense of where a typical community is falling in this process. Phil, I'll kick it back to you. Oh, actually, Mr. LeBlanc, did you have a question?
Thanks, Luke. Yeah, you mentioned the 10% might kind of fall off if we don't meet certain dates, but I also believe the 42.8 may also decrease if we don't hit certain dates as well. If this project goes beyond, I think, a year, that 42.8% can potentially actually decrease as well. Can you just confirm that?
I think, Phil, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, 42.8% is what you have now. It is quite possible that the state may re-examine its reimbursement formula and make adjustments, and those adjustments will go down.
So to the point that you're making, there are normal adjustments made every year to that housing aid formula, and it's just like the funding formula for our operations side. If they look at our, things like valuation of properties is included in that, looking at our overall tax capacity, there is a possibility that over time, if we wait, it's likely to go down, not up, just based on the current trend.
Thank you.
So as you can see in this slide, since it's been up here for some time, you do see that these incentives, all of them with the exception of one, are temporary. And they have construction commencement dates and construction completion dates before these incentives expire. You also see the other types of incentives that you currently do not qualify for. So the project timeline, like I said, we worked with the building committee a lot on this because we want to maximize these incentives, which means work either needs to start or be complete by certain dates. And there is a process to go through that I represent in the legend in the lower left-hand corner. You have the selection of all the consultants that are going to help you through this process. You have levels of design that you go through to refine these projects. You have time that you need to procure and award these projects, then actually construct them, and then close out and commission them. Keeping in mind, a lot of the projects that we are talking about at the elementary school are what we call summer slammers, meaning you try to do a significant amount of work at that school during the summer months because you don't want to interfere with the teaching and learning. Absent the pandemic and what has happened because of that, let's assume that everything is back to normal. We want this work to happen during the summer. And in order for that work to happen in the summer of 2022, we need to work backwards to see what steps need to be in place. And as you can see, assuming an approval by RIDE of this project that would come in about May or June, you would probably elect for a bond vote on November 2nd. It is an off-year election, but that is the election day. Prior to that, you basically need to get all your ducks in a row. If the bond vote is successful and the vote and procurement and construction to try to get as much of it done during the summer, and as you see, all of that work falls. The middle school, however, you see that the middle school construction needs to start in December. That is the 10% additional that we're talking about. And as you will see, the middle school is a significant project. It is a reasonable schedule, and it is very doable. However, the impact, so you're going to relatively, the community will see, yes, we have actually done this work. I can see that we have improved the school. The last part of this submission is local support. And that is, school building committee has made a recommendation to submit, that the school committee votes to approve submission. So the total Coventry project package estimate, including the work at all 7 buildings, is approximately $85 million. If you recall, everything I said about the cost estimate, this has to include everything, the trade costs, all the soft costs, contingencies, escalation, furniture, etc. We're proposing about an $85 million package. And as it breaks down as a percent per school, this kind of really makes sense. We want to do about the same amount of work at the 3 elementary schools. Washington Oak, your newest school, needs a little less. Western Coventry, your oldest school, needs a little bit more. The high school, the flagship school, needs more because we want to do some educational enhancements there, as well as address some NEASC deficiencies. And then, of course, the middle school, the most significant investment, is about 84% of that number. Now, I want to make a comparison. Them navigate and successfully, overwhelmingly, passed their bond vote for their work. So their application for stage 2 was $114 million. When RIDE was done reviewing it, they approved it at $106 million. It is not uncommon for the RIDE and the School Building Authority to $1 million. The state reimbursement for Newport is 35%. However, based on their eligibility for incentives, their reimbursement could be up to 52%, which would be about $56 million. Their share 48% is 50 million. The average Newport here. So for $156 a year on the average Newport home valuation, they are doing $106 million worth of work to their school system. Now, you are not Newport. We're proposing an application amount of 85 for. Your reimbursement baseline is 42.8. The 10% incentives that you're eligible for could get you up to 52.8, which means the state share would be about 45 million. Coventry's cost share at 47.2 would be about 40 million. Determined. This becomes more important as you try to sell the bond vote. And there's a lot in their elementary schools, and they are currently under construction now. And, Berlin has also been approved for a significant amount of work.
Million. Warwick's most recent one was 56 million, but I know that's part of our tax dollars. That 250 million expires, and as I said earlier, there's no guarantee we'll get it. There's a high probability, but there is a guarantee if we do not go forward by certain timeframes, we will lose 10% of the project right off the top. Any project going past that date. There's no guarantee. Ludwig?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Councilwoman Dick.
To me, how the baseline is determined.
So I do not know the disbursement level. A quick Google search that I'd be happy
To validate that the number that has been assigned to our community is indeed the correct one.
For year 2021, on the website, there's a PDF that lists all the housing aid reimbursement rates. State funding formula for operations. Like I mentioned, tax capacity is one valuation of the formula. So for instance, Central Falls and Phil, you can fill me in, but I know it's over 90%. They get over 90% housing reimbursement.
It's like 98. It's huge.
Yeah, 98. I think.
Yeah.
The urban cores tend to, the higher need communities tend to get more, and that follows the state funding formula for the operations side as well. So as I mentioned earlier, we've been trending a bit down in the funding formula. As we know, there was some recent cuts. Some of that is due to adjustments in the funding formula, so I would not, we can't bank on anything until we lock this in. Once we lock it in with RIDE and we were to move forward with a bond vote, Phil, remind me, we have 6 months, right, from the time that we get approval to get to a bond vote.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think that's part of it. You are basically locking in that commitment for RIDE. So we would have to determine if we wanted to move forward once we get a determination from RIDE on all the reimbursements.
Thank you.
No. Councilwoman Shockley.
I just wanted to get a better understanding. So if we were to go to bond, if the voters were to approve, our increase, would it be based on a 20-year bond? And if so, does that mean we may have bonded money that we won't be paying on anymore at any point during this process? I don't know if my question made sense, but could costs go down from a bond we already have as they go up for a new bond? I don't know how that works.
So Ed, you can chime in here too, but in general, so if you pull up the bond summary from PFM that lists out all the debt of the town, you will have what they call cliffs. So there'll be points of where debt drops off. And as those debt cliffs drop off, obviously lightens the burden on monies that's already extracted from the town because the town pays the debt. So as you move forward, those debt cliffs help. I know, Ed, you might be, I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it was 2023 you had one.
There's about $1 million that comes off in 20, I believe it's 23 off the top of my head. But it's just about $1 million in debt service, annual debt service.
So the way I explain it to simplify is like you have a couple credit cards you owe on, one gets paid off, you can now reallocate some of that money to the new card. You're not necessarily reallocating because we have set debt amounts that we'll pay. That's negotiated in, but it's a little like that. So yes, it softens the burden. If anything, keeping in mind that we have a bond rating to keep up. So we want to make sure that we don't have too much debt either. So we don't necessarily want to take on more debt, but it'll certainly improve, or soften the burden on when we go for each year assessment on bond rating. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ed, if I said anything out of turn.
Nope, you got it. Other than the credit card, I think it's a little different from that. But
Yeah, it's not a great analogy, but I try to.
a little oversimplified.
Does that answer your question, Ms. Shockley?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any members of the school building committee that have questions? Don't be shy because this is a work session. Questions can come from both sides. So certainly, Mr. Levis.
Yeah, I just want to take the opportunity. I don't have any questions, but I just wanted to thank the building committee. Obviously, thank the town council for letting the school building committee present tonight. But I think it's important for the public to recognize that we have numerous experts that are sit on our building committee, two actual project managers that work for construction that do this work for a living. So it's been a phenomenal process. I think not only having Studio JAED as a consultant to do the work, but we have very capable members of building committee. And I've been involved with other building committees, and not to compare or contrast, but the quality of the input that we have from our building committee is second to none. I think that's important. Like I said, we have people that do this work for a living who have contributed throughout the entire process. So I want to thank every member of our building committee, and it's been a phenomenal process. And kudos to Mr. Murray for keeping this, despite the challenging times we're in, keeping this process moving forward. And just to add, I think last year, our reimbursement rate, or when we started this process and met with the school building authority, they had said, I think we were 44%. So it's already dropped from 44 to 42.8% reimbursement. So I think that's important to know. Thank you.
And actually, that's a very important point you bring up. 1% may not seem like a lot when you're talking millions of dollars. It matters a lot. When we talk about 10% net kicker bonus, that's a lot of money. And to lose out on that would be a shame, especially since we're all paying for it in the state dollars. We're getting taxed on it whether we know it or not. So it's a matter of whether it comes back to the town or not. And that's something, as we dialogue with the community, we need to keep bringing up. Not to sell the project, but I think information is key in making sure that people understand the why now. Because eventually, at some point, the building committee has discussed this. We realize that all of our facilities have needs. We realize they all need to be addressed at some point. The question is when. And if we do put this off, we're in a current environment that is very school friendly. We have certainly had many years, many decades before this, that haven't been so friendly, where the funding hasn't been so available. And if we choose to take on the project moving forward in another 5 years, we're going to be going back to the same projects that are going to be even worse and probably spend more money. And that's not to sell the project, that's just a fact. Any other questions before I just kind of give a brief overview of next steps? Mr. LeBlanc.
Thank you, Luke. Just a quick question here. I believe 84% of the $85 million bond is just the middle school. So that's roughly, let's just call it $71 million of the 85. Why was the decision made not to just focus on one school and touch multiple schools? I mean, is it purely just because obviously the more schools we touch, the higher the reimbursement we'll get? Is that really the main driver? Or why didn't we just focus on just middle school, since that's the school that all children in our town go through? Just wanted to ask the question.
Sure, that's a very fair question. Our experience in working with RIDE and the School Building Authority and the people that we will be presenting to next week and who will be reviewing the projects take very seriously the issue of equity across the entire school district or school department, grade levels, students from various socioeconomic points, and they strongly encourage having an approach that addresses as many needs as possible at as many different schools as possible. Recognize, when we started this process a while ago, the need is always greater than what can be addressed. And you have to decide what path you will go down. And in this particular case, there is a future need at the elementary school level, right? That train is coming. But it needs to be looked at in its entire context. And if we know we may be deferring need for a greater investment at the elementary school level, then let's at least do what I said, which was protect our asset, right? Reduce operating costs. Increase the aesthetics of the space so people know that you care and that they can see that there's some investment in this facility. The work, if you look at the elementary schools at 2%, 1% is minimal. But I can assure you from people that are going to be working in that school, someone like Jason who has to maintain this facility, these improvements reduce operating costs with new lighting, brighten the space, improve ADA deficiencies that you have. This is low-hanging fruit that we are, as design professionals, encouraged to include in a bigger project.
And I'll just say from the building committee standpoint, it quite frankly was something that we as a building committee voted on. We had multiple discussions early on about the stage one, what the need was, went through the options. We know that the elementary schools need to be touched. The question is, once you touch one, you're going to have to touch all of them, and to what extent do you want to start providing money to one and then having to really put it into all of them. It's unfortunate because we know there's a need there, but we had also talked, and I've made no, I haven't kept this quiet, is that we have had discussions about, do we consolidate? Do we not? That couldn't be really wrung out in this process. I think it's a larger discussion that needs to happen as a community. So we had to pick early on what track we wanted to go down. So for example, I know that South Kingstown went down a road and then they had to backtrack substantially well into the process. And we didn't want that to happen. We wanted to kind of pick a line and stick with it. The line we chose was to make the middle school the larger project, and then put some money to protect the assets, as Phil mentioned, at the other schools, and do some additional upgrades at CHS, knowing that there was some substantial NEAS need. There was some foundational data that supported that. So we had those discussions at the building committee level, and all my committee members who are on can attest to this, hopefully, that we did vote on it, and we solicited input from each person during those votes. Councilwoman Dixon, you were next.
Thank you. As you know, I've been an advocate from day one about improvements to the high school, and I would like Phil to really discuss what we're actually going to be doing at the high school, because the slide in which that was listed was going over very quickly, and members of the council may not be privy to what is happening at the high school.
Sure. So right now, preliminarily, we are proposing a number of projects. One that would include enhancements to the front entrance so that people know where the front door is to the high school, give that a sense of presence. The science labs are the area that we're focusing on in terms of educational enhancements and in improving that and STEM and STEAM are very important at the high school level. There are a series of NEASC issues associated with the gymnasium that we want to address. There is some HVAC issues that have not yet been corrected that we want to address. Jason has brought to our attention some other issues such as site and parking that needs to be corrected, an emergency generator that needs to be replaced. And again, some of the other low-hanging fruit, painting and some of the aesthetics. So I believe we're targeting about maybe a 6% investment at the high school.
Is there anything on the NEASC list for accreditation purposes that is not being addressed in this project that we really need to look at?
I'm not aware of it this time. Certainly, as we continue to go down this path, we'll make sure we'll touch base with the administration to make sure.
I believe, to answer that question, and Superintendent Levis, you can chime in on this, but I believe we've touched all of them. One of the big things that's been brought up over and over again is the gymnasium floor and the bleachers. So those are going to be addressed. I agree. I think that being our flagship school, I'd love to put more in the CHS, but the truth is that the last bond went primarily, a substantial amount went to the school facility, including the athletic facility. And unfortunately, we have some dire need at the middle school. So once it's a slippery slope, and I'm just giving you context as part of our discussions was, once you start funding certain classrooms at CHS, then what about the other classrooms? So the science labs are easy, low fruit. We did look at those during our tour of being very specific. They have a lot of built-ins. They are very dated. And if we're looking at STEM and supporting that type of curriculum, that seemed like a logical way to go. But there's no doubt that there's more need. When Phil talks about painting too, I want to make sure that we're clear. It's not getting a couple buckets of paint and painting the walls. It's a full paint package for the entirety of the school. So that will also be an asset protection measure. In addition to, as we saw at the middle school, and Ms. Ludwig, you brought up a good point. Like when you initially looked at the cafeteria a year ago, it looked very drab. It looks a little bit better now because the principal of that school put a lot of time and energy into repainting the facility with the facility staff, the physical plant staff. But so paint can make a big difference in the overall look and feel of a school for very short money. Mr. LeBlanc, you had another question.
Sorry, I did have one additional question. Mr. Conti, you had a really good sheet. It showed the project plan. I think you called them summer slammers for the majority of them, but the middle school was very drawn out. I think it went over 2.5, 3 years almost. In the $85 million number, does that include moving students out of the middle school and placing them elsewhere, or does that not include those type of costs?
No, that is part of the project cost. So whether we have the opportunity to relocate them to an existing Coventry facility, or whether we would have to invest that money in temporary trailers on site, that number is baked in. Okay. $85 million will cover we had a lot of discussions with the school building committee on how best to do that. And as Luke said, this is not the final design, but we are really locking in on how things may need to be phased, sequenced, and approached. And it will work. And Christine and Alita would tell you that we will want to do everything we can to make that schedule even shorter, right? Reduce cost and reduce, the distraction and the impact of the school. So, yes, we are presenting.
Bill, I have to do the deduction off of each school, like right now.
Of leeway time, so that we're not running right against the deadline. Okay, Mr. Murray, would you please adjourn your meeting?
Gladly. Can I get a motion to adjourn at 7:40 PM?
Move.
Ms. Hall, can I get a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. I'll ask Donna to make a roll call vote, please.
Yes, just a question. Who was the second on that?
That was,
Rob.
Mr.
Rob.
LeVay.
Oh, okay, thank you. All right, roll call. Luke Murray,
Yes.
Alita Hall. Okay, see you. Amy Anzalone,
Yes.
Don Cowett,
Yes.
Ian Dixon,
Yes,
Christine Kennedy,
Yes.
Rob Levesque,
Yes.
Joe Lucian,
Here?
Jason Martin,
Yes.
Kathy Patnode,
Yes.
John.
remember to adjourn our meeting at 7:41.
I'll make that motion.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mr. LeBlanc. Roll call, please.
Joanne, you're muted.
Luann,
Ian Dixon,
yes?
Jennifer Ludwig,
Yes.
James LeBlanc,
Yes.
Kimberly Shockley.
Yes.
The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for participating. We had a good discussion. It's exciting to see how this project is coming together. Lots of detail. Thank you so much, Phil, for all of the detailed work and your explanations, which are always so clear and concise. And have a good evening, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.